First of all, I want to thank you all for allowing me this opportunity to come and share with you all about Operation Christmas Child shoeboxes and just how it is impacting our Free Will Baptist churches in Bulgaria. It's very exciting, and I'm just really excited about being able to share that with you all. If you want to go ahead and start with the first slide. I'm just going to jump right on into this because I don't want to. If anybody that knows me knows that I could talk all night about shoeboxes, so I know you all don't want to be here that late, so I'm going to get right into this and just get you all updated on what's going on. Every 24 hours, 31,020 children hear the gospel of Jesus Christ. And every 24 hours, 15,190 enroll in the Greatest Journey discipleship program. And that is actually a 12-week discipleship program that is offered to all the children who receive a box. Every 24 hours, 11,477 graduate from the Greatest Journey discipleship program. Every 24 hours, 8,930 accept Jesus Christ as their Savior. That number right there is worth it all. That's in every 24 hours. And then every 24 hours, 8,408 commit to pray, but not just pray, but to share the gospel of Jesus Christ with others. All because it started with one little simple gift of a shoebox. Mark 16:15 says, "And he said unto them, Go ye into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature." And on December 28th, I once again traveled to Bulgaria to assist missionaries, our Free Will Baptist missionaries, with 15 Operation Christmas Child shoebox distributions. Of those 15, 13 of them were in 100% Muslim villages. Stepping into their world to share the gospel of Jesus Christ, a world where it is normally not welcomed or allowed, but because of the simple gift of a shoebox filled with toys and school supplies and hygiene items, we were able to do just that, share the gospel of Jesus Christ. In the first village that we stopped at, it was actually the village of Novi Pazar. We actually have a Free Will Baptist church in this little village. It's the second one in the area that was planted. It's in a village that for hundreds of years had never had a Christian church. And we now have a Free Will Baptist church there. And because of Operation Christmas Child shoeboxes, that little church is starting to grow. The shoebox distributions have the same basic way that we do them everywhere that we go. We'll go in and we will sing songs, and we actually learn gospel songs in Bulgarian and Turkish language so that we can sing gospel songs to them. And then we will play some games and then give them a little snack, and then that's when we get to share the gospel. And then once we get to share the gospel, then we give them the shoeboxes. The next village that we went to is Paniat Valvo. And this one was one of the odd ones. It was full of twins. And this is just a couple of the pictures of two of the sets of twins. But that village, I've never seen so many twins in one building in my life. It's just kind of odd in that little village. But these people were absolutely precious. And they actually greeted us with some Bulgarian songs and dances and had lots of sweets and breads for us to try. And at this particular village, there was a farmer there, and he is a very poor farmer, but he was a goat farmer. And his source of income was selling goat's milk and fermented goat's milk. And for him, his gift to us was fermented goat's milk. And so you don't ever want to do anything to offend someone. And so we all graciously took a large glass of fermented goat's milk and we drank it. And I will just say that I survived. That's where we'll leave it. So now the next village that we went to was the village of Kapitan Petko. And this one, the parents, we actually had some parents at the end of this presentation was actually talking to our missionaries about the gospel. This is a Muslim village, and these people were curious, and they were asking questions about who our Jesus was. And you'll see at the bottom picture, there's two little ones standing there with their mother. She insisted that I get a picture of them so that I could always remember them and to pray for them. And so I love sharing that picture and just ask people to remember to pray for them. They don't know Jesus as their Savior, but we're hoping and praying that one day they will come to know him. The next village that we went to was the village of Tukach. This was actually a last-minute add-on to our list. We weren't even supposed to go to this village, but we had another village that the mayor called, and all of a sudden, a village that was full of children, he says no longer had any kids. That was his way of saying he didn't want us there to share the gospel. And so we didn't get to go. But God blessed us with this little village, and this actually became a larger blessing than what we had thought. Something amazing happened at this one, because you know how you hear the stories of how the perfect box went to the perfect child. Well, this is one of those villages. There's a little boy, and there's a white arrow pointing toward a little boy with his head down. This little boy was from a very poor family, and he had been begging his mom for a soccer ball and a soccer uniform. And his mother told us there was no way she would ever be able to afford to give him that. And God just did his thing. You know, this little boy opened his box, and I wish I could have gotten a better picture of him, but he opened his box, and his face just lit up, and he was so excited because laying in his box was a soccer ball and a pump and a soccer uniform, which is something I don't think I've ever seen in a box before. But this family was so excited, and they were like, "How did you know?" We're like, "Well, we didn't know, but we know someone that did." And that opened the door to be able to share how Jesus hears our prayers, and he knows what's in our hearts. And so it opened the door, and it helped her. She started asking more questions about who this Jesus is. So that one little box that somebody somewhere around the world packed has made a huge impact on this one little family. And at the end of this, God blessed again. The lady who is over this little village came to our missionary and said, "You know, next year I can get you into 18 more Muslim villages." And that was shocking, because it's hard enough to get into these villages, but to 18 completely new Muslim villages. And 2 weeks ago, I was told that we are so far scheduled to go back to 16 of those 18 this year. That in itself is a miracle, because Muslim villages just don't welcome in Christians, especially ones who are going to be sharing the gospel. So I ask you to pray about those, and that God will tender their hearts, and they will be open to the gospel when we go. The next village that we went to is the village of Kospichan. This was actually a children's home, and most of these children are actual orphans. And so they will be living here probably there until they graduate school and are at the age that they have to move out. We actually went to this children's home 3 years ago, and because of that visit and sharing the love of Jesus with them and loving on these children, there is now a weekly Bible study that happens at this children's home. And when we got there, it was a very cold, snowy day, and so they greeted us with some cake and some hot tea, wanting to warm us up. They're very precious people. And since the Bible studies have started there, there has been several of these kids, and not just the kids, but the adults who work at this children's home have come to know the Lord as their Savior. And that in itself, again, it's worth every bit of it if just one soul comes to Christ. I want you to keep the name of this village in mind, because at the end I want to share a story with you. And remember this one, it's the village of Kospichan. The next village that we went to is the village of Kochevo. And as you can see, even the parents were so happy and excited when they received their little gifts. And some of the parents actually pulled a missionary aside after the shoebox distribution and was asking questions about what we had taught. Because when we teach the lessons to these kids, it covers from creation until Christ's return. So it hits the highlights so that they understand that Jesus wasn't just a regular man, that he is who created everything. And so it helps them to understand why we're there a little more. The next village that we went to was the village of Milanovo. Milanovo was it was a village that broke my heart. When we first got there, we actually went to what they call a little convenience store. We would probably call it a little hole in the wall. And we went there for lunch. And while we were sitting there eating lunch, we noticed the missionary we were with was talking to a man, and the conversation, though we couldn't understand it because it was in Bulgarian, was starting to get a little louder and a little heated. And so we knew something was going on and obviously wasn't good. And after the conversation ended and we finished our lunch, we walked outside and we were told that the village imam, and so that would be the head of the Muslim church, asked us to leave. He said we were not welcome. He did not want us there. And to make sure that we did not talk to anyone, he sent some of the young boys around the village and told the families they were not allowed to come to the shoebox party, that they were not allowed to talk to us and they were not allowed to come. And then if they did show up, that there would be consequences. And in these villages, the consequences could be you're forced to leave. You would be shunned. If you're a business owner, you could lose your business. So no one showed up except for these three people. And they were actually the owners of the little convenience store that we had lunch. And they actually came in through the back door. And they wanted to hear, they said they wanted to hear what we had to say about Jesus because they were curious and they wanted to know. But they did make it very plain to us that there would be consequences for them when it was found out that they were there, that they could possibly even lose their business. So I ask that you continue to pray for this family, that whatever has happened, that God will lead them to where he wants them and that he will continue to show his love to them and draw them to him. We can come to church and we don't have the fear of someone telling us that we have to leave the community we live in and that we have to quit our job or we've lost our job. But this little family did. And that was very brave of them because they didn't have to come. They could have just stayed in their little convenience store and been comfortable. But they stepped out of their comfort zone to hear what we had to say. The next village that we were in was actually the village that we base out of. And this is the village of Schumann. And Schumann is where we actually have our Free Will Baptist Church there. And that was the first one in the area. And you can see the pictures of the shoebox party, and over on the wall you'll see the boxes of the cartons of shoeboxes that we would be pulling from to go to the different parties. This is actually a new church building. The church actually has been out of the missionaries' home for several years, and it finally got so full that they had to find another place. And later on I'll tell you about how the Lord worked that out. But this would be our home missionary, our home church there in Schumann. And our next village that we went to is the village of Osinovitz. And this was a school in a small village that we went to, and the kids all had different little programs that they had prepared for us. They were singing and dancing and had little poems they were saying to us. And these kids were just the sweetest. And they really listened when we shared the gospel story. And when we would ask questions, they would raise their hand so they could answer the questions. So they were listening, not just there because they had to be. But they were very, very sweet. And at the end of this, one of the other team members encouraged our missionary to go back and ask the school principal if he could possibly come back and teach more to the kids. And she said she would be fine with that and that she would allow him to come back on a weekly basis to this school and continue to share the gospel. Again, this is in a Muslim village, and that just doesn't happen. And God had worked on those hearts that now they can go back on a weekly basis and continue sharing the gospel to these children. The next village that we went to is the village of Stronio. And these kids were pretty wired up when we got there. But there were also adults who were there that didn't come because they had children. They actually didn't have any children, but they wanted to know what we were there to say. And there were a few of them who had a lot of questions afterwards and wanted to know more, surprisingly so. And the mayor actually asked the missionary if he could come back on a regular basis and start teaching more. When these things happen, it's just amazing to me, because these are Muslim villages and they just don't ask for the gospel to come like that. But they see something that they don't have, and they have questions. And this is just so amazing that it's all because of those little green and red boxes that we were able to get in these villages that normally we would never be able to get into. The next village we went to was the village of Novosel. And we had to meet in a little tiny library because there was nowhere else in the village to meet. But again, there were more adults afterwards that cornered the missionary and was asking him questions. And that's what we're hoping for, not just the kids to want to know more, but the adults who bring these kids. Because you know how that is when you come to church, you're not going to leave your little ones at home, you bring them with you. And so that's kind of the hope, is that they'll keep bringing their kids back to learn more. The next village that we went to was the village of Bulgaria. And this is actually the third Free Will Baptist church plant in that area. And this one has an amazing story of how it all came about. But we were not able to hold the shoebox distribution in the church because the church was too small. And so we were able to have it in the church community, the village community center, which is probably from one side of the church parking lot to the other. So it was just a short distance from the church. And this village, these people were just so excited about us being there, but they were really soaking in what we were teaching about the Lord. And that in itself was just beautiful to see that they were really, it was the adults who was really listening. Now, this is the second village, so I want you to remember this name. It's Bulgaria, that I'm going to mention in the story that I'm going to tell you in a little bit. And it's just amazing how God is just working because of these little shoe boxes. The next village that we went to is the village of Rish. And these people had, the gospel had never been shared there before. And I'm just going to be honest with you. They stared at us like a cow staring at a new gate. They just like we were aliens or something there for the first half of it. But by the time we left, they understood that Jesus loved them and that we love them. And we just wanted to love on them a little bit and show them Jesus' love. And they had, beautiful smiles on their face when we left, and they were very appreciative. So just pray that, God will continue to work on their hearts. The next village that we went to was the village of Chernoglovsky. And this was to a little preschool. And preschoolers don't always grasp the concept of what you're teaching when it's the gospel, but the wonderful thing about this was we also got to share it with the teachers. And while we were in the floor playing with the kids after we went through all the program, and we were playing with them with their little toys in their boxes, the missionary was able to talk more about the gospel with the teachers. And that was, again, that's worth every bit of it. Every shoebox that we gave out there was worth it so that the gospel could be shared with those teachers. The next village that we went to is the village of Vinets. This was actually the last one that we went to. And by the time we got to this village, we actually knew probably a week or so ahead of time that we were not going to have enough shoeboxes. So we took one of our days, our only free day, and we went to another city about 2 hours away, and we just pooled our money and we shopped until we could pack about 150 shoeboxes. You never want to lose that opportunity to share the gospel, and if it took every last penny we had, that's okay. We were fine with that. And so we were able to pack enough boxes that all the kids were able to get one at the school. And it was amazing. These kids, they had no idea why they were having an assembly at school. They just were excited. You know how kids are. They're excited to get out of class. And so they were so excited. But then we started singing songs, and they started trying to learn the songs, which was amazing because we were singing our gospel songs in Bulgarian. and the kids listened. You would think a group of 150 kids, it's gonna be hard to keep their attention, but they were really attentive. They were listening, and they would raise their hand to answer questions about the lesson. And these kids were just, I don't know, there was just, some of them, you can see the pictures of me with them. They just want to be loved on. And the amazing thing was, is, you know, we had some of the boxes left over that were from Operation Christmas Child. And then some of them were the ones that we had packed. And these kids didn't care that maybe somebody's box was a little bit fuller than theirs. They were just so excited. They were pulling their stuff out of their boxes, saying, look what I got, you know, and showing it to each other and passing it around. And they were just so excited. And when you ask everybody, what are they saying? Well, they're just excited because they don't have to share what they've got, because everybody got a gift. And our kids, they know when they get something for Christmas, unless it's something like an Xbox or whatever the kids play these days, they typically don't have to share what they get. Everybody gets their own gifts, but these kids, that didn't normally happen. And so they were so excited that they got their own gifts. That was theirs, and they didn't have to share. You know, and as I said before, we just did not want these kids to not get anything. You know, going and sharing the gospel would have been great, but it would have been hard to get to the school had we not packed those extra boxes. And so that kind of, you know, I encourage you, pack those boxes. You know, if you were planning on doing one, how about adding an extra one to it? If you were going to do 10, do 11. Do that extra one, because it might be a little village like this that needs those extra boxes. The next few pictures are just some pictures of some of the people that I've met over time, and these are people that I've made friendships with that I know they're going to last through eternity, and I'm so thankful for them. You can go to the next one. And these are people that, whether they're in the group that went with me or there are people that we met in Bulgaria, it's just like they become family. Because when you're out sharing the gospel and you're in places that you're like, I don't know how this is going to go, you learn to really lean on each other and pray for each other. Now, these young ladies here have a very special story. 3 years ago was my first trip to Bulgaria to do the Operation Christmas Child shoeboxes. And in the bottom corner, you'll see some girls who are sitting at a table that's actually at a girls' detention center. These girls, some were in the detention center because of what they'd done, and others were there because of what their family, their parents had done. And no one else wanted them, so they were just placed here. And the first year that we went there, 3 years ago, was the first time ever that someone was allowed to come in and visit with these girls, and the first time ever to share the gospel. Normally, the only people coming into this detention center is going to be like immediate family, maybe someone from like the legal system or whatever. But we were able to go in, and we shared the gospel with these young ladies, and we were able to give them shoe boxes. And because of that, it has allowed, the doors have been open. God has provided a way for the doors to be open, for our missionaries to go back on a weekly basis and continue sharing the gospel. And you'll see at the top my right-hand corner, there's a group of girls who have been in that detention center, who are now out, and they have given their hearts to Christ. And this is a picture of them at summer camp. And so all because of those shoe boxes, the gospel, and just a visit in general, but the gospel was able to go in somewhere it had never been before. And the young lady up at the top, my left-hand side corner, she has a special story, and I was not there when she was there. She actually just came in earlier in the year. And when you first come to the detention center, you are put in quarantine for about 2 weeks to make sure you're not bringing in any sickness, because that's the last thing you want is a bunch of sick girls in a detention center. So they quarantine you in your room, you can't come out. And on this particular day, our missionaries were there for Bible study, and they were like, you know, we were ready to throw our hands up. The girls were out of control that day. It just didn't feel like we were accomplishing anything. And so on their way out, they noticed a young lady sitting in her window, and they could open their windows, but they had bars on them, so they're not going to be able to escape. And so the young lady was sitting at the window, and so one of our missionaries stopped and she spoke to her, and she asked her, she said, why weren't you at a Bible study today? And she said, well, I'm new here and I'm still in quarantine, so I can't come out of my room. And so the missionary wanted to leave something behind with her, and all she had left was a small children's Bible story book. But she slipped it through the bars and said, here's you something to read, when you get bored, and because 2 weeks stuck in a room, you're going to get bored. And so she left it behind. She told her she'd be praying for her, and they left. Well, around Easter, they go back and having their Bible study. Well, this young lady obviously was able to come. And she came up to the missionary and she said, can I get a real Bible? And she said, well, why do you want a real Bible? And she said, well, the little book you gave me. She said, well, I was in my room, and she said, I got bored, and she said, so I started reading it. And she said, I was raised Muslim. And she said, I do my prayers, it's like, I think 3-4 times a day. I'm not sure how many times a day. That she had her prayer rug. She said, I do my prayers, I have my prayer rug. But she said, I kept reading that little book, and she said, I kept reading it over and over. And she said, so I thought, why not try praying to this Jesus? And she said, so I tried it. And she said, when I prayed to him, I could feel him in the room with me. And she said, when I prayed to Allah, I'd never felt anything. And she said, I figured if I felt him in the room with me after one time of praying to him, I needed to find out more about him. So I would love to have a Bible so I could learn more about him. And now this young lady is actually teaching a nightly Bible study in her room each night with the other girls in the detention center. So it all started because 3 years ago, we went there and shared the gospel because of the Operation Christmas Child shoeboxes. And you can see the ripple effect, how 3 years later, they're still affecting people. You can go to the next slide. This will kind of sum up, the next story will kind of sum everything up of why it's so important. If you know me, you know my love for Operation Christmas Child. I worked for Samaritan's Purse for 9 years, and I've continued to volunteer all these years since. And there's just something special about those little green and red boxes and how God uses them to change the world. And I'm going to read this story to you because I don't want to forget any part of it. I have it down so I don't forget. On my second and third mission trips, I went to Schumann, and the church in Schumann was meeting on the second floor of the missionary church planters' home. And they'd grown beyond capacity and had to find somewhere else to meet. And after some time, they were able to purchase the downstairs of an old theater, but it was, as you can see, in bad need of remodeling and brought up to code. And they were looking for contractors, affordable contractors, to get the majority of the work done. Now, remember the first village I said I wanted you to remember, and that was Kaspichan. This is the village where the little children's home was at. The children's home that now has a weekly Bible study because we were able to take shoeboxes to them. At one of the Bible studies, one of the workers of the children's home knew that the new church needed somebody to come in and do the remodel on it. And she told the missionary, she said, I know someone who owns a construction company who might be able to give you a good deal on it. And so it may make it a little more affordable. Well, the missionary called the construction company owner, and he came to give them an estimate. And the next week, this guy shows up at church. The construction company owner does. He's not a believer, but he showed up at church. And then he showed up the second week. And that second week, he gave his heart to the Lord. And it gets so much better. On the third week, when the missionary was going back to the children's home to do Bible study, the construction company owner calls and says, hey, on your way there's a little village called Kulugoritsa that's right before you get there. I want you to stop because I own a hotel and I want you to stop and see it on the way to the children's home. And he was like, I've only got like 45 minutes. And so it's got to be a very quick visit. And so they stopped on the way there, and the construction company owner showed him the little hotel. It's not hotels like we have here. It's much different. But he said, listen, there's a couple here in the village that I want you to meet. They are Christ believers like we are. They're Christ followers like we are. And he was like, well, sure, I'd love to meet them, but we got to make it quick because I have to get to the children's home for Bible study. And so they got in the car, drove down the street, and the construction company owner introduced the missionary to this couple. And the construction company owner said, if I give you the keys to the hotel dining room, would you be willing to come on a regular basis and lead us in worship? Because we have no one to lead us in worship. And we need someone to help us, to lead us and to teach us. And the missionary was like, are you sure this is what you all want? And they were like, absolutely, we need somebody. He says, well, I don't know anybody in this little village, so you all are going to have to get out and invite people. And so they said, absolutely, we will invite people. And 6 days later, they had their first church service, and there were 6 people from the village, and there were several people from the church, the Free Will Baptist Church in Schumann, who had came to join them. And since then, the church has grown, and there's been several people who have gotten saved and gotten baptized. And when I was there in January, the little church had 50 people. All because, if you think about it, I don't want to get ahead of myself. It's just amazing when you think of the whole story. But that's not all of the story. Now, the owner of the hotel said that years ago, his grandfather owned that property where the hotel was at. And his grandfather had become a Christian. And he dedicated a part of that property to one day build a church, a Christ-following church was his words, a Christ-following church on that property. Well, the grandfather passed away and it never happened. Well, some years later, this man inherited, he came into owning this property. And he said, what I want you to know is that the part of the property that was dedicated to build a church is exactly where that dining room is, where they started having their first church service. So God, even though that property was dedicated to God many years before, it may have taken some time, but there is now a church on that exact spot where that man dedicated it. He didn't see it come to fruition, but it did happen, all because he was dedicated to the Lord. Now, I want you to see how every bit of this is connected, because it just makes this huge circle. All because of some people like you who packed a shoebox, and a group of people like I went with chose to go out of their comfort zone and go on a mission trip to a country where they couldn't speak the language, and we couldn't even read the alphabet because it's not even our alphabet, it's Cyrillic, to help a church planting missionary deliver Operation Christmas Child shoeboxes to children who had very little and never heard of the hope of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And one of those places they went to was a children's home in a little village of Kospichan. And because of the love of Jesus Christ shown to those kids in the children's home, this missionary was asked to start a weekly Bible study with the kids and the workers. And because someone in the children's home heard that the missionary was looking for a construction contractor to build out the new church building, he was introduced to a construction company owner. And because the construction company owner was shown the love of Jesus Christ, he started coming to their church and accepted Christ as his Savior. And the construction company owner owned a small hotel in a small village where an evangelical Christian church had never existed. And this small village had a handful of evangelical Christians who needed a church and a leader. And because of this hotel owner being willing to let the church be started in his hotel dining room, And because of the church starting in the hotel, the door was open to have an Operation Christmas Child shoebox party for the kids of the village. And because of that, there has been people from that party who have started going to the church and making decisions to follow Christ and being baptized, which all actually began many years ago when a man did the uncomfortable thing by following Christ and dedicating a portion of his property to one day build a Christ-following church. And it all began so long ago and now has gone full circle, all because of some people did the uncomfortable thing that Christ called us all to do. Mark 16:15 again says, "And he said unto them, Go ye into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature." And then Acts 26:18 says, "To open their eyes and turn them from darkness to light." Sharing the gospel brings sight, hope, and freedom to those trapped in spiritual darkness. God often calls us into hard, dark places to bring the light of Christ. Can you go to the next one, please? That is now the new church since it has been finished, and as you can see, it is growing. Go ahead and go to the next one, and the next one. And this is actually the little hotel, and if you look, there's a little dark colored door, and through that door is where they have church twice a week, and it is filling up. All because someone showed the love of Jesus by giving these little kids in a children's home a shoebox. It all started with that. You can go to the next one. There are a few ways that you can help to make sure that the light continues to be taken to dark places. First, you can pray. Pray for the missionaries and their churches. Pray for more people to answer the call to missions. And pray for those who go on short-term mission trips to help the missionaries. This year, the Lord